The smell reaches you before anything else. It always does. A sweetness that has no right to be sweet. Thick and cloying and wrong in a way that your body understands before your mind catches up. You're standing in a medieval English village sometime in the 14th century, and someone nearby has died. What happens next is nothing like anything you have been taught to expect from death. It is more intimate, more brutal, and far stranger than you can possibly imagine. You know this person. In a village of 200 or 300 souls, you know everyone. The man who died was your neighbor, your fellow parishioner, the man who helped you repair the fence along the eastern field last autumn. He was ill for a week. The fever took him on a Thursday. By Friday morning, he was laid out on the floor of his own home, on a simple wooden board, with his hands folded across his chest and a cloth pressed over his face. His wife is already moving with the quiet, practiced efficiency of grief. Not the immobilizing grief of people with time to mourn, but the grief of someone who has a great deal of work to do before sundown and intends to do it. Because here is the first thing that separates medieval death from everything you have been conditioned to expect. There is no distance. There is no professional intermediary who steps between the living and the dead and manages the process on your behalf. There is no refrigerated room, no embalming table, no quiet, carpeted office where a kind man in a dark suit explains your options. The dead remain in the home, among the living, until burial. In summer, that window might be as short as 24 hours before decomposition makes the situation genuinely unbearable. In winter, you have perhaps 2 or 3 days. In every season, the body is washed by the women of the household. The wife, the mother, the female neighbors who arrive without being asked, because this is simply what is done. The water used for washing is cold. The hands doing the washing are bare. The body is wrapped in a shroud, a simple length of undyed linen or wool, depending on what the family can afford. There is no coffin for most people. Coffins exist, but they are expensive, and in the medieval period they are frequently rented rather than purchased outright. The wooden box carries the body to the churchyard and is then returned to be used again. What goes into the ground is the shroud alone, the cloth pressed close against the face and form of whoever lies inside it. If you have ever wondered why the image of the shrouded dead appears so consistently in medieval art and imagination, this is why. It was not an abstraction. It was what you saw regularly throughout your entire life. The procession to the churchyard is brief and communal. The body is carried on a bier, a simple wooden frame, by the men of the village, often including you. The priest walks ahead or behind, depending on local custom. There are prayers, the ringing of the church bell, the sound of feet on mud or frost or summer dust. The whole village turns out, not because it is required, but because in a world without the anonymity of cities, the death of one is felt by all. Children watch from doorways. Dogs follow at a distance. The bell continues to ring, and everyone who hears it knows exactly what it means. Another soul has left. Another body will go into the ground before nightfall. And the ground. This is where the details begin to accumulate in ways that should genuinely disturb you. The medieval churchyard is not the tidy, well-spaced lawn of a Victorian cemetery. It is a working burial ground that has been in continuous use on the same small plot of land for generations. In a parish that has served a community for 200 years, the earth beneath your feet is not simply earth. It is composed, to a significant degree, of the remains of everyone who came before. Graves are dug to a depth that varies considerably depending on the gravedigger, the season, the hardness of the ground, and how urgently space is needed. In busy periods, during outbreaks of plague, during famine years, during the catastrophic mortality events that strike medieval communities without warning, the depth becomes shallower. The space between graves becomes narrower. The mathematics of the dead begins to overwhelm the mathematics of available land. By midnight in the weeks following a significant mortality event, the gravediggers of a large parish church in a town like Winchester or Coventry or York might be working by torchlight, pressing the newly dead into ground still disturbed from the burial conducted the previous afternoon. There is no neat interval between interments. There are no permanent individual markers for most people. Wooden crosses rot within a few years, and stone markers are a luxury restricted to the wealthy and the institutional. Your grave, if you die as an ordinary medieval English person, will almost certainly be unmarked within a generation. The ground will close over you, and in 50 years another body will be laid almost directly on top of yours, and no record will indicate that either of you was ever there. 3 hours into any significant digging operation in an old churchyard, the gravedigger begins to encounter bones. Not occasionally, routinely. The upper layers of a well-used medieval churchyard are filled with the disarticulated remains of previous occupants. Femurs, vertebrae, fragments of skull. The church has a protocol for this. The bones that surface during grave digging are collected and placed in the charnel house, a small stone structure, often located beside or beneath the church itself, where the displaced bones of the unnamed dead are stored in bulk. You would have walked past the charnel house every Sunday on your way to worship. The bones of your ancestors were stored inside it, mixed indistinguishably with the bones of strangers. The smell, on warm days, filtered through the stone. This is the detail that goes deepest, the one that sits furthest from anything in your modern experience. The dead were not gone. They were present, physically, continuously, in the landscape of daily life. The churchyard was not a place you visited occasionally on anniversaries. It was the open ground adjacent to the building at the center of your community, the space where children played, where village meetings sometimes gathered, where animals occasionally grazed when the grass grew long between burials. The boundary between the world of the living and the world of the dead was, in the most literal physical sense, a low stone wall. Often not even that. And beneath the flagstones of the church itself, beneath the very floor where you knelt to pray, the wealthy dead were buried in stone tombs and lead coffins, their presence marked by the brass-inlaid slabs under your knees. You prayed over the dead. You prayed among the dead. You had never known anything else, and it had never occurred to you to find this strange. Until the plague years. Until the mortality events that arrive with a catastrophic swiftness that breaks every established system simultaneously. When the Black Death reaches an English town in 1348, it does not merely kill people. It destroys the entire apparatus through which death was being managed. The priests who administer last rites begin dying themselves. The gravediggers cannot keep pace. The charnel houses fill and overflow. The shroud cloth runs short. In the worst affected communities, mass graves are opened outside the normal churchyard boundaries. Vast trenches dug in fields and gardens and waste ground, the dead lowered in without ceremony, without individual prayer, without the social scaffolding that had given death its meaning. In London, sites like East Smithfield become emergency burial grounds of staggering scale, their precise dimensions only recovered by archaeologists centuries later. The ground swallowed thousands. The records noted hundreds. And yet, the people who survived those years did not collapse into permanent disorder. They grieved, and they reorganized, and they adapted with a tenacity that ought to genuinely humble anyone who examines it. The communities that lost half their population to plague, and some lost more, rebuilt their burial practices, reconstructed their charnel arrangements, re-established the rituals of laying out and washing and procession that gave death its human shape. The women who washed the bodies of plague victims, understanding the risk and accepting it anyway, were not performing a bureaucratic function. They were making a profound collective declaration that even the most devastating death deserved the dignity of human hands. The medieval English relationship with death produced something remarkable and frequently overlooked, an extraordinary democratization of grief. Death in this culture belonged to everyone. It was not a private matter conducted behind closed doors in a specialist facility. It was a shared experience managed by the whole community, with roles distributed among neighbors and kin, with practical knowledge passed between generations, with the collective wisdom of the village applied to the universal problem of loss. The women who prepared the body, the men who dug the ground, the priest who prayed, and the bell ringer who rang, the neighbors who arrived with food for the bereaved family. These people formed an unwritten, unpaid, relentless network of care around every death. No family faced it alone. None were expected to. What those people understood, without ever articulating it in these terms, is something that modern societies have spent considerable time and money trying to relearn. That grief shared is grief made survivable. That the presence of community around death is not a ritual pleasantry, but a functional necessity for the living. The medieval churchyard, with all its grim practicality and accumulated bone, was not a place of horror to the people who lived beside it. It was a place of continuity, a reminder that the dead had faced the same winters, the same hunger, the same darkness, and that they too had endured long enough to die, surrounded by people who knew their names. We carry something forward from those people, even now. Every time a community gathers around its dead, every time neighbors arrive unbidden with food and presents, every time a bell is rung so that everyone who hears it pauses for a moment and remembers, the medieval village is still speaking, still insisting that no one should face this alone, still performing, across 7 centuries of distance, the same extraordinary act of collective care. In our next journey, we're going to step inside the specific world of those who were paid to manage death in medieval England. The gravediggers, the body washers, the bell ringers, the charnel keepers, and discover what their daily existence actually looked like, what they were paid, what they believed, and what extraordinary things they knew that the rest of the village depended upon without ever quite acknowledging. The people at the threshold deserve a story of their own, and it is stranger and more human than you are expecting.